Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cover 2 podcast. As you can tell, I am introducing us today. My name is Jared Smith.
I'm Nenad.
And if you can't tell, Nick is a little sad today, just by his facial expression, his tone of voice when he just said his name. And for those of you who don't know, Nick is one of the biggest Clippers fans out there. And unfortunately for Nick, his Clippers did not show up yesterday. I'm sorry. I love it. There is no other way to say this. I am gloating today as the resident Lakers fan here, someone who does not like the Clippers at all. And Nick, who has been constant about his Clippers team, all year long, Kawhi being the quote unquote best player, the Clippers having the better all around team, more depth, more offensive firepower, a better defensive team, all these things. And on paper, Nick, you were right. But guess what? Those Denver Nuggets, down 3-1 for the second consecutive series, came back and shocked the world by beating the LA Clippers. And not just beating them, but like a smackdown. They were up by 20 at one point in the fourth quarter. And it's like the Clippers were giving up. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George combined for 24 points. 24 points from your two superstar box office players, and that's all you get from them in a Game 7, a win or go home situation. I cannot wait to get Nick's reaction on this. I had to put my early 2 cents in there. But listen, I'm sorry, Nick, but I love to see you sulk like this. It's fantastic. I don't get to see this often, so I'm going to take full advantage of this today. But I'm going to give you the floor and give you the first chance to speak about how awful your Clippers were and the fact that they are now being sent home and the Denver Nuggets are moving on to face the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals.
Jared, there's so much I want to say and so much I don't want to say on this podcast. I'm just extremely disappointed at the Los Angeles Clippers. Not only did they screw up this Game 7 and they didn't play hard and the stars didn't come to play, they choked away Game 5 and they choked away Game 6. It is just, I never imagined I would be in this position right now talking about the Clippers losing in the second round to the Denver Nuggets. I thought this discussion might come in a week or two if the Lakers were to beat the Clippers, because that was more of a possibility. Now that's not going to happen, and it's because the Clippers choked. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Jared, it's so bad. It's so bad. I couldn't even find my Clippers jerseys before this podcast to represent my team. I was delayed at getting on here on Skype because I couldn't find the jerseys. It made me even more sad, Jared. It made me more sad. I wanted to represent my team in the lowest of low moments because as bad as this franchise has been, this has to be the worst possible thing that could have happened to this franchise. You have Kawhi Leonard, you have Paul George, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, the reigning sixth man of the year, one of the best six men of all time in Lou Williams, and then Kawhi, three-time champion, finals last year, Paul George, all-star player. I'm going to get into him in a second. Just wait. And Doc Rivers and just the rest of the roster was solid too. This has to be the worst. It's always the worst when you're expected to win and you don't, right? Like the Clippers the last few years, whatever, with Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, they got close, but most likely they probably would have lost to the Warriors. Okay, the Warriors were dominating the West. They were dominating the NBA. This year, though, man, the Clippers had the best team. They were the Warriors this year. They were supposed to be the Warriors, and they choked it away. And whew, before I get into kind of the statistics and explain to people why they lost and just kind of just getting into the team and why they probably lost, I just want to once again say that I still like this team. I'm still going to support this team, but this is the worst thing that could have happened to this franchise, and they deserve everything they're getting on Twitter. They deserve everything they're going to get on this podcast. And Jared, I mean, let it flow. I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna take this one on the chin, man. I'm gonna take this one on the chin.
Yeah. You know what? You're being stand up about it, and I do love
Yeah.
it. All right, and I appreciate you saying that you're going to continue to ride with the Clippers, and that's your team. Of course, it's your team. You know, listen, as a Cowboys fan, as a Lakers fan, as an Angels fan, any of that, you're going to ride with your team, win or lose. But today, you're riding with them as they are riding and literally flying back home to LA to go on vacation. Is that listen? There are so many factors, right? And that we can go into with this. And the key things that stand out to me in games 5, 6, and game 7, all three of those games, which were closeouts, at one point in the second half of each of those games, the Clippers were up by more than double digits. In game 5 and game 6 specifically, the Clippers were up to 16 points at one point. And the Denver Nuggets found a way to come back and win the game. In the third quarter of game 7, the Clippers were up by 10 points. And once again, the Nuggets were able to find a way to come back and win. Here's another interesting stat. In game 7, in the second quarter, the Clippers put up 32 points alone. In the second half, combined, quarters 3 and 4 together, 33 total points. Like, Nick, I don't – how can you – please explain this to me. You have Doc Rivers, right? An NBA champion, albeit with the Celtics back in 2007, but still an NBA champion, one of the best, most well-regarded coaches, most well-respected coaches in all of the NBA. Kawhi Leonard, box office superstar, no doubt about it. Paul George, who the Clippers gave up everything for to trade for him, right? And you have, you know, the Montrezl Harrells of the world, the Lou Williams of the world, the depth that everyone kept talking about with this Clippers team. And yet when I look at these stats, it just completely baffles me. Like, this team just crumbled. Now, I do want to give credit to the Denver Nuggets, right? And I think sometimes that can get lost when there's such a catastrophic, collapse like the Clippers had. You always immediately want to jump to the team that lost, in this case, the Clippers. But I think we do need to give Denver credit and say, listen, man, this Denver team just does not quit. They do not back down. They almost play better with their backs against the wall. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this show, in the first round of the playoffs against the Utah Jazz, Denver was down 3-1. They didn't quit. They just said, we're going to take this one game at a time. And they ended up coming out of that series with a 4-3 victory, right? Same thing with the Clippers series. It's like the Clippers are up 3-1, and Denver's like, hey, we're right where we want them. We got them right where we want them. And they did exactly what they did in the first series by coming back and showing resiliency. And so I just want to give credit to this Denver Nuggets team, even though for the majority of this podcast or the majority of this segment, we will talk about the Clippers. The Denver Nuggets deserve all the credit in the world. And I know the Lakers are not going to, but you know, the Lakers better not overlook this Denver Nuggets team. Even though the Lakers have had time to rest and on paper, the Lakers are favored, Denver's coming in hot, and they have all the confidence in the world. Even if they get down in the series, they will not back down.
Yeah, no, Jerry, I'm glad you brought up the Nuggets too, because this Nuggets team is good. Like, this is a good team. As much as the Clippers choked, because they did choke. You mentioned 15-point lead in Game 5, second half, 19-point lead in Game 6, and then the 10-point lead in the second half. That's a choke. I mean, it's just, you can say. But the Nuggets team is still good. It's a good team. And Jamal Murray came to play last night. Jokic played well in all three of the elimination games. So the reason the Nuggets won was because they came to play and they allowed the choke to happen, right? We've seen teams in the past where, maybe they allowed a good team to win that Game 6 or win that Game 5, even if that better team didn't play well, right? Just like it reminds me of the Cavs up 3-1 against the Warriors. Difference was there, they lost Draymond Green, all that stuff. But the fact that they were able to come back, they played really well in Game 5, Game 6, and Game 7. But let's get back to the Clippers, because I do need to go over some of the statistics. And when you look at this team, the team that I was really behind, stars didn't come to play in these games. Two of them in every single game didn't come to play. So I'll go over it right now. Kawhi in Game 5, Kawhi and Paul George, they played well. You had Kawhi 36, 9 and 4, PG 26, 6 and 6. Solid. Who didn't come up? Montrezl Harrell, 6 points. Lou Williams, 4 points, 0 for 5 from 3. That's how you lose a game, and that's how you choke right there. Game 6, Montrezl Harrell, 5 points. Lou Williams, only 14 points. You know, these guys are 6 men of the year, and they're averaging. None of them are getting over 20 points in any of these games. Kawhi Leonard played well, 25 points, a little lower than his playoff average. And then Paul George, 33 points. So again, we're not seeing the Paul George and Kawhi choking in these other games. It's the bench. It's the other guys. You know, meanwhile, the Nuggets are playing well. And then in Game 7, like you mentioned, Jared, Kawhi Leonard, 14 points. Paul George, 10. Lou Williams, 7. Kawhi was 6 for 22. Paul George was 4 for 16, 2 for 11 from 3. Just pathetic. And Lou Williams was 3 for 11, 1 for 4 from 3 in Game 7. The only bright spot was Montrezl Harrell with 20 points. It's too late, though. You know, Harrell never got it going during the entire playoffs, and neither did Lou. And maybe it has to do with Lou going to that strip club, get suspended for 10 days. Maybe it has to do with Harold
Pepper Lou.
Yeah, maybe it has to do with Harold just not being – he was a little injured coming into the bubble, and then he had to take some time off for his grandmother's funeral. Not blaming any of those things. I'm just saying, like, I do want to say this. I do want to pose this question to you, Jared, because it will seem biased if I bring this up. Do you think the bubble affected this Clippers team? And do you think this would have happened if they would have played the normal regular season like it was supposed to be played?
No, not at all. And you want to know why? Because for the last 6 years and for the entirety of the Clippers organization, going back to the 50s or 60s or whatever this Clippers team was inaugurated, they have never made it past the second round of the playoffs, right? And so I don't want to hear about this bubble and how it's affected him. Honestly, in my opinion, throughout this entire playoff bubble, we have seen some of the best basketball throughout by far, right? You don't have any home court advantage. You know what I mean? So I don't want to – I'm not saying you are using that as an excuse, but no, we have seen great basketball so far. Teams have had to put up with not just injuries, but players on every single team have opted out, right? Certain players, not superstars, but players have had to deal with players leaving – or I'm sorry, teams have had to deal with players opting out and having to, you know, other bench players step up. So the Clippers are, the same thing has happened with them. And no, I don't use that as an excuse at all. Last year, there was no bubble last year. Clippers still couldn't get past the second round. Now, they did not have Kawhi Leonard. They did not have Paul George. But let's go back to the big three with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan. They couldn't get past any team then, right? So this Clippers team has had opportunities with very good squads, and they still, for some reason, do not produce. I don't know what it is. A question that I did want to pose to you later, but since I'm thinking about it now, I will just ask you. With this loss and how catastrophic it is, and the fact that the entire world is looking at this Clippers organization right now from top to bottom, is Doc Rivers in trouble? Now, he's been with this team for 7 years. And like I said, I have the utmost respect for him, and so does the rest of the NBA. He's an NBA champion before. Many people look up to him, players, coaches, etc. But when you've been with the team for 7 years now, and you haven't been able to get that team past the second round, I'm sorry. With the squad that I am currently looking at, the depth chart that I am currently looking at right now, and the pedigree and the resume of a Doc Rivers, I would not be surprised if, Doc Rivers is on the hot seat going into the next year, or if there's potentially a parting of ways. I mean, what else do you need, Doc Rivers? Really, what else do you need?
Jared, what's amazing about what you just did there was I literally was thinking of the exact same thing and was going to ask you that exact same question. That's why we do a podcast together right there. Just want to let you guys know. That's podcaster telepathy right there. I am so glad you asked me this question. Jared, yes, absolutely. Because when you look at Doc Rivers, it's almost like he's better at building a team from the ground up instead of like infusing a bunch of all-stars, right? Like that might work for a coach like Eric Spoelstra. It might work for a coach like Ty Lue, someone that doesn't have as much control. But I think Doc Rivers is kind of one of those true head coaches where he develops a team over time. And he was developing this Clippers team the last 2 years or whatever without Blake Griffin, without Chris Paul. I think that almost infusing Kawhi and Paul George might have messed up the team chemistry in some ways, right? And I do think when you look at Doc Rivers, he's won one championship, right? He had a great team and he won one championship. What has he done since? He lost to the Lakers, the next championship he played. And with the Clippers, he hasn't been able to get past the second round. So when you look at it on paper, Doc Rivers is an amazing head basketball coach in the NBA. But is he the right fit maybe for this Clippers team anymore? I don't think so. It's similar to what just happened with Mike D'Antoni. We're not going to talk about that on this podcast, but he's not going to go back with the Rockets. Sometimes you just plateau as a head coach and you have to move on. There was David Blatt with the Cavaliers. It didn't work out. I know that was only for like a year or so, but it didn't work out. Ty Lue comes in, they win the championship, right? Mark Jackson with the Warriors. Sometimes you just plateau. Steve Kerr comes in, they win multiple championships. So maybe the Clippers do need that new head coach. It will be difficult because Doc Rivers is the GM as well, and does have a little bit more control than most head coaches do. And he would kind of have to fire himself in a way. And Steve Ballmer would then have to figure out a general manager and a new head coach. But with this roster, who needs a general manager, right? Like right now, we just need a head coach to win us the championship, to beat the Lakers, to beat the Nuggets. But yes, Doc Rivers is absolutely on the hot seat. And it brings me back also to a clip that we've seen now on Twitter. I think it's the last 2 days of Phil Jackson during the NBA Finals saying Doc Rivers teams choke in the fourth quarter. They tend to kind of give up in the fourth quarter. And look what's happened a lot in Doc Rivers' tenure with the Clippers. You go back to the Rockets series, I believe it was in 2015 or 16, when they were up 3-1 and they choked away a 20-plus point lead, and the Rockets ended up moving on. Right? It's probably the best Clippers team they had before this one. And then this one's the best example. So, yes, Jared, absolutely. I think Doc Rivers should be on the hot seat. Maybe you have one more go around. But, I mean, if they don't win the NBA Finals next year, he has to go. Absolutely has to go. And I would not mind if he moves on after this year. This is very similar to Mike D'Antoni with the Rockets, where you kind of maybe give him one more chance. And if he doesn't make it next year, I mean, Jesus, let's at least get to the Western Conference Finals, right? Like, come on. The Clippers.
It has not been done in the Clippers' history. They have not been able to get past the second round. There is a cap. There is a ceiling on getting past the second round of the playoffs for the Clippers. I do want to mention one more thing because we do need to move on shortly. We do have some breaking news out of college football. Good news as far as the Big Ten goes. But my last point is simply this with the Clippers. I woke up this morning at 6:30, Nick. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I set an alarm for 6:30. You want to know why? Because I purposely wanted to watch Get Up this morning on ESPN. I wanted to watch First Take this morning. I watched Undisputed with Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp. I wanted to watch all of the sports news this morning, not to take their credit and use that for my own. But I wanted to go. I wanted to hear all the other sports reporters and sports journalists and TV news personalities just completely go off on the Clippers, and it was amazing. But I was disappointed in one thing that I heard in almost every single show this morning was the fact that everyone kept saying, well, this is the team chemistry wasn't there. And I believe it was Lou Williams last night in his exit interview that also mentioned the lack of team chemistry. I'm sorry. That's BS. Okay. And whether you want to talk about Doc Rivers, if you want his first championship with Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen, those three players were in their first year. All right. So don't tell me that Doc Rivers cannot build team chemistry in the first year with new players. Okay. I don't want to hear that. We have gone a full season, more than a full season, because each team had 4 months off because of the coronavirus. Right. So it's basically like a new season right now. And you're telling me that through the entirety of the regular season, then the 4 months off, and then being in a bubble where you had nothing to do but play basketball and build team chemistry, that this Clippers team was not able to get on the same page. And that was, one of the main sticking points and main reasons why this Clippers team lost. I'm sorry. I'm not buying into that. That whole team chemistry thing to me is that should have been established a lot earlier on, especially, during the quarantine and especially in this bubble when that's all you're doing is around each other 24/7. Most of your families are not there. You are, you're away from your home and all of that. So I just wanted to point that out, that I was very surprised how many people were bringing up that whole team chemistry aspect as a kind of a scapegoat or as a reason why this Clippers team lost. I'm sorry. When you have Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and the rest of the squad, the rest of the depth that this Clippers team has, yes, you need to have team chemistry, but your superstars should be able to overcome that. And clearly this team did not.
No, I agree with you on that, Jared. I think that they had plenty of time to figure out team chemistry. They're literally stuck in a hotel with each other, like figured out, and they played the entire regular season together. The reason this Clippers team lost is coming from a Clippers fan. Lou and Harold never figured it out in the bubble, and Kawhi and Paul George didn't figure it out in Game 7. They did not step up as superstars, and they absolutely failed this team. That's the reason we lost in the bubble. During the regular season, they succeeded. They were the number 2 seed. They beat the Lakers twice. It's the reason they lost this is because in the bubble, Harold, Lou never figured it out. They weren't the true 6 men that they had been the last couple of years, and Kawhi and Paul George failed the Clippers in Game 7 specifically. So that's why they lost. You got to play all 7 games. And Kawhi, I gave them credit for Game 5 and Game 6, just kind of showing why they might have had a chance. But in Game 7, nobody stepped up. So that's the reason they lost. All right, let's move on to some better topics for
Nick is so excited to move on right now.
Oh, I cannot wait. I'm so happy.
You're lucky that there are more pressing things that we need to talk about, or we would have spent an entire hour roasting your Clippers.
God, the Big Ten is back, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So college football, it's weird this year, right? We have the SEC, we have the ACC, we have the Big 12. They're all starting to play. We saw the ACC start last week. We see the SEC starting this week. I believe the Big Ten's already going too. And now we have the announcement. The Big Ten is back on October 24th. They figured out the COVID testing. They figured out everything else. And we're going to have Big Ten football. Just to give you a couple notes from an ESPN article that I read before we started this podcast. This is very informational, so I'll go on talking about it. The Big Ten, they will play 8 games in 8 weeks, no bye weeks. The Big Ten championship game will be December 19th. The college football playoff selection day is December 20th, which means the Big Ten is in the college football playoff. They figured it out. There will be no fans attending football games this season. The only people that would be allowed possibly are the families of the players and staff at both home and away games. And as far as COVID testing goes, it's actually going to be based on positivity rates and the population of the college town that they're in as well. Very interesting twist there. So, for example, if the positivity rate on the population is over 5% as far as COVID goes, and the team rate is over 7%, they have to pause practice and competition for 7 days. Anything lower than that, they're pretty much good, right? So if it doesn't reach that plateau, the Big Ten will be playing all 8 weeks and we'll have no postponements. So there's that, Jared. After hearing all that, what are your thoughts? The Big Ten is now officially coming back and they will be competing for the national championship this year.
My first thought is I'm elated and so happy for these athletes that get a chance to go out and showcase what they can do. And really, let's look at the number 1 overall pick from this past season in Joe Burrow, right? Who just had his first game with the Cincinnati Bengals. Going in to last season, I don't think many people knew Joe Burrow's name unless you were a fan of LSU or a fan of Ohio State in the last few years, because Joe Burrow, growing up in Ohio, originally went to Ohio State before transferring to LSU. My point is, because of the phenomenal season and also winning the national championship that Joe Burrow had, that elevated his status to being the number 1 overall pick. Joe Burrow might not have been drafted last year if there was no football season, right? So for these Big Ten players to go along with the ACC, Big 12, and SEC, these players not only get a chance to, do what they love. It's the main reason why they're attending these Big Ten schools, but they also hopefully potentially get to showcase themselves to NFL scouts and teams to potentially elevate themselves for a chance to be drafted in the years to come. So that is the first and foremost thing that I am, most excited about. It's just for these players, right? We've seen Trevor Lawrence of Clemson. We've seen Justin Fields of Ohio State, who this has impacted even more, come out on Twitter, start petitions as to say, we want to play, right? When you see high school teams in your own state playing, but yet and professional teams playing, but yet for some reason college can't play, right? It's like there's a discrepancy. There's something wrong there. I think the Big Ten, this is no secret, they kind of jumped too quickly instead of just kind of sitting back and digesting what was going on like the other conferences did. The Big Ten just immediately came out and said, we're not going to have a season. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, right? We haven't even had a chance to kind of sit down and discuss, all the terms and what's going on here. We don't even know what's going on yet. And the Big Ten was so just reactive right away. And now they've had to backpedal. And because of, we've seen parents from these Big Ten schools come out and try to get, their lawyers involved and get this legal process started. So this has gone so much further than just playing the game of football. But I'm happy that we are going to have the Big Ten involved. The only thing I wish is that we had the Pac-12. Obviously, you and I live in California. Unfortunately, we're not more than likely not going to have the Pac-12, but we do have 4 of the 5 major conferences in play. And hey, it's just more football for us to watch on Saturdays.
Yeah, absolutely, Jared. And we do want to stress that the best thing that's coming out of this is for the players. There are over 1,000 players that now get to play college football because of this that weren't going to. There's 14 teams in the Big Ten, over probably about 75 people on each football team, right? And not that all of them are going to make the NFL, and not that all of them are going to move on to maybe the XFL, but you have over 1,000 players now able to play that weren't going to play. Never mind all the staffers, all the graduate assistants, all these people trying to work in football in general. This is awesome, right? And then also to boot that, yes, there will be less games than usual, but we might see Ohio State in the national championship now. We might see Michigan. We might see Penn State. And it makes the college football season so much more legitimate, right, Jared? It makes this a legitimate college football year where before, Jared, I'll tell you this. I watched college football last week. It wasn't the same. Like, it was not the same knowing that it's only the ACC and SEC and there's no fans in the ACC and all that stuff. But, the more teams we have, we have like about 60, 70 teams playing now. This is awesome, right? It's way more legitimate. The top 25 counts more. This is just good. But the best thing that's coming out of this is 1,000 players get to now play college football. Now, you spoke about the Pac-12, and Jared, I had my research ready because I had a feeling we might discuss Pac-12. 2 things that came out of the Pac-12 this week in light of the news and rumors that the Big Ten was going to come back. They're still targeting at the earliest a mid to late November start. I don't get that. Might as well just not have the season at some point. I mean, I get the exposure of the players like we're talking about, but you're coming up on the NFL Combine and you're coming up on like mini camp and stuff like that. The Pac-12 would not be playing in the national championship if this is the way it were. And I don't understand why they're proceeding with such late goals. Now, the Pac-12 commissioner did state that one of the biggest issues is that universities in California and Oregon do not have approval from public health officials to start contact practice. So, and then also the fires in those states in Washington, Oregon, and California are also affecting possibly coming back. Fires are going to be over by the time you'd start the season. I'll just be honest with you on that. Fires aren't going to last a month. Well, yes, but fires tend to last a couple weeks and they're over, right? And so I don't think the fires are really concerned here. The biggest concern is that the universities in California, Oregon, the government officials aren't allowing them to play. And what we saw, I don't know if you saw this, Jared, USC wrote a letter to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, stating that they would like to try to play, that they want to collaborate with the government and try to figure out a way to play. And if you're wondering, well, it's only universities in California, Oregon. Well, that's Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, Cal, USC, UCLA, at least. That might even be forgetting one in the middle there, too. That's half the conference that wouldn't be able to play. So, and I already know they're moving. They just moved a couple baseball games from Seattle because of the fires. So Washington State are also affected in all this stuff, too. So, the Pac-12, it's going to be difficult, but if they can figure out the COVID testing of this and figure out a way to talk to California and talk to Oregon, I think they can absolutely do it. But one of the problems is that they just spend too much money on other stuff. I don't know if you saw this, Jared, lately. I know I'm running on a little long with this, but, the Pac-12's headquarters spends over $8 million just on property tax every year. Do you know what the rest of the Power 5 conferences combined spend on property taxes? $1.5 million. So the Pac-12 is million. The Pac-12 is there in downtown San Francisco, just to explain, and the rest. So the Pac-12 has a lot of other issues here, and they just really need to step up because this conference has been going down and down and down for the last couple of years in competition and in just sports in general. And they need to figure this out. But mid to late November doesn't work for me. What do you think, Jared?
No, not at all. And you brought up great reasons, right? Number one, first and foremost, why do you play the game? You play for an opportunity to get to a national championship title, right? Yeah. So if there is no national championship title, if there's not even a conference title, why are these kids playing? Now, like I said, it could be to expose them to potentially have a chance at getting a shot in the NFL or another professional league, which of course would be great. But at what cost if you're only able to play 3 or 4 games, right? Because by November, the season is 3/4 of the way done, right? And you're right. There's the NFL Combine that comes up, all the training and all the preparation that goes into that. So yeah, you're right. The whole, and it's not even like just it's mid to late November. We're getting into Thanksgiving, and the Pac-12 is going to just be starting their season. It makes no sense to me. And another thing too, unfortunately for the Pac-12, there are just so many more political avenues and political issues that the Pac-12 conference has to deal with as opposed to these other conferences. And you're right. I love the fact that you brought up, USC, and it was specifically a wide receiver. I forget his name, but he specifically wrote a letter to Governor Newsom. He could have written a letter to the Pac-12 commissioner. He couldn't have written a letter to a lot of other people, but he specifically chose to go up the political ladder chain and go to the governor of California, because unfortunately in California, that is where the buck stops, right? This is a lot more political than people may think it is. Yeah. And so at this point, if November is the sticking point here, then I agree with you. I don't think the Pac-12 should have a season. I think players should basically just train and prepare. If you're eligible for the NFL, train and prepare for that. If not, then get ready for your next college football season. It's unfortunate, but at this point in time, I do not see many other positive solutions for the Pac-12 to get back on the field and have a legitimate chance, at least a conference title, let alone a national championship.
And the NCAA needs to step up too if the Pac-12, because of the governments and states are not allowing them to play. The NCAA needs to step up with the eligibility and give those players an extra year of eligibility. They should not lose the eligibility because governments won't allow them to play. And the NCAA, as crooked as it is, do the right thing here. And I don't know what I think we talked about this a long time ago in one of our kind of coronavirus podcasts, what the eligibility was and all this stuff. But now we see a lot of the other teams playing. You still need to hook up the Pac-12 if those players don't get to play. Just because they have a bad commissioner and just because the states won't allow them to play, it's not the players' fault. And they should not be screwed by this. And neither should the Mountain West and all the other conferences not playing right now. So, the NCAA needs to step up on this as well. But yes, the big news here, the Big Ten will be playing starting October 24th, an 8-game season ending on December 19th. The Pac-12 nothing new here, and they're really just waiting on now government officials, and they have not figured out anything. So good news and bad news there with the Big Ten and Pac-12. Better news, obviously, with the Big Ten. All right, Jared. Well, we got the NFL to talk about. This is a power-packed podcast. So Jared and I are going to just go over two topics each from the NFL Week 1, and we are going to look forward to a matchup or storyline in Week 2. So we're going to do this. I think I'm going to start with this first.
You're going
right,
to take
Jared?
the lead.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the NFC West. I think this is very, very interesting. You see me rocking my Cardinals hat, but I'm not going to come here and just, cheer. And although I loved that Cardinals win over the San Francisco 49ers, there's a lot more to talk about because of what's happened to the 49ers after this game and what happened with the Seahawks and Rams. So I just want to dive into the NFC West. And Jared, if you have a question for me, if you want to chime in, absolutely do it as well. So the NFC West, you have the Rams with a big win over the Cowboys, the Seahawks with a dominating win over the Falcons, and then the Cardinals with a surprising win over the 49ers. So we have 3 1-0 teams and 1 0-1 team. Perfect, right, Jared? So we both predicted the 49ers would win the division, and they're the only team with 0-1 on their record after this week, right?
Of course.
Exactly.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly how we predicted it. But the big thing with San Francisco here, because we did predict that they would be 12-4, they'd be 13-3, they'd be the top team in this NFC West. They have now lost Richard Sherman to IR. They have lost Deebo Samuel to IR, and they have lost George Kittle for a couple weeks too. And after that Cardinals game, if you watched it, Jimmy Garoppolo was the reason they lost that game on offense. And he is still not the quarterback that is making the difference in that offense. So I think San Francisco just added a couple more losses to their record. And I think this division is absolutely up for grabs. The Cardinals might be better than people thought as well, especially defensively. Really, besides Isaiah Simmons in that game, the rookie, the Cardinals kind of dominated the 49ers on defense. The 2 touchdowns that they scored were Isaiah Simmons absolutely losing coverage of Raheem Mostert on a Texas route, Mostert going 70-plus yards.
Yeah, I saw that. That was...
And then the miscommunication on the second touchdown was also Isaiah Simmons' fault as a rookie. So besides that, the score ended up being 22-24. Without Isaiah Simmons making those mistakes, the Cardinals held the 49ers to 6 points. And so this Cardinals team, unbiasedly, when you look at the stats and look what happened in that game, is better than people think. And obviously you have DeAndre Hopkins, 14 receptions as well in that game. Almost had a touchdown, got tackled on the 1-yard line. The rest of the offense fired off pretty well. Kyler Murray, almost 100 yards rushing and over 200 yards passing, so a big game for him. And then when you look at the Rams and Seahawks, Russell Wilson in that offense, 38 points. The Rams with a big clutch win against the Cowboys at home. This NFC West is interesting, Jared. I think it's absolutely up for grabs, and it's really who's ever going to win kind of that season series against the Rams. To see if the Seahawks can beat the Rams twice, and the Cardinals can beat the Rams twice, and it's going to come down. I'm telling you, it's going to be 3-3-3 all the way through in the NFC West. It's going to be a shootout to the end. I can't wait.
Potentially, I could see that. No doubt, the toughest and best division in all of football. So my first review of Week 1, unfortunately, has to go to the Cleveland Browns, right? And I was hyping them up a little bit last week on our prediction show, saying that I believed that the Cleveland Browns, with the talent that they have on paper, they should make the playoffs and make some noise. And this is Baker Mayfield's year. It is a make or break. It is a chance for him to shine and potentially be on his way to a new contract, even though he may not deserve, $100 million. That's just what quarterbacks get these days. So he's at the fork in the road, right? He's potentially on a $100 million contract or potentially going to be out of a job next year. And after Week 1, he's looking like he's going to be out of a job, right? I'm sorry. I get they were playing the Baltimore Ravens, arguably one of the best teams in the league. Some people picked them to go 16-0 this year, and the Ravens obviously did their thing with Lamar Jackson and the host of weapons that he has. But 6 points from the Browns, six points, right? I'll say it, but I'll say it again. They have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, the arguably, and probably not even arguably, the best 1-2 running back punch in all of the NFL. Their offensive line is better. They attributed draft picks to that this offseason. You have Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham Jr., David Njoku, and Austin Hooper as your weapons for Baker Mayfield, and you come up with 6 total points. Odell Beckham Jr., right, just a couple years ago with like MVP conversations, all this stuff, regarded as one of the best receivers in the league. Now, I'm not saying this is all his fault because he can't throw himself the ball, but 3 receptions for 22 yards? Now, he had 10 targets, but I'm sorry, a 3-to-10 ratio is not what you were looking for, right? Kareem Hunt was arguably the best player on the field. He had 13 carries for 72 yards. But still, I'm so dumbfounded by this Cleveland Browns team because I don't understand how with all that talent that you have, that they still just look like a JV, not even a JV, a freshman football team. So I'm sorry to, turn to negative town, but Cleveland, step it up. And fortunately for them, they have a short week. They'll be playing the first Thursday night football game of the season. Actually, the second, because last week was the opening week with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans. So the second Thursday night football game of the season when the Cleveland Browns host the Cincinnati Bengals. Hopefully they can get it together. It's their first home game. Maybe that'll get them juiced up. I don't know. But something needs to happen because so far, from what I've seen from this Cleveland Browns team, like I said, albeit against a good Ravens team, not impressed at all. And Baker Mayfield, you are on your way. You're playing your way out of a starting job.
Browns, the Clippers of the NFL. I was going to say it right there. The Clippers of the NFL. It's very similar, right? When you look at a team, you stack it up. I know it's week 1 against the Ravens, but yeah, when I saw that score, I was like, are you serious? I got the over on that game because of how many points the Ravens scored. That's how bad that was. I was like, I'm not going to get the over because the Browns aren't going to score points. And the Ravens scored so much in that game that I actually ended up winning the over. All right. So, got to talk about the Buccaneers. The huge game against the Saints.
It's the Brady.
TB12's debut in Tampa. Looking disgusting in those jerseys. I'm just going to say that in the first place. Bruce Arians is coach. All the weapons in the world. Gronk. And they fell flat. And they lost handily to the New Orleans Saints. First of all, the Saints look as legit as ever. And they look like they're a true Super Bowl contender. I know we say that every year. But it does seem like this was a huge win for the Saints. Because if they lost this game, it could have hurt them for the rest of the season, to be honest. I'll just throw that out there. The Buccaneers, I said it on our preview show. I don't think they're going to be ready beginning of the season. I think they're going to take some losses early because Brady's still getting ready to this offense. They didn't get to do preseason games. Brady's still learning a new offense in some ways. So I could see them not having the best record at the beginning of the game. So I wasn't surprised when this happened. I was more surprised that Brady throwing interceptions and pick sixes and just the team overall not playing well. Now, I know Mike Evans was beat up. Chris Godwin was in concussion protocol, and other things happened in the game. But, I'm just going to say this. The Buccaneers are not going to go 13-3 this season, and they're not going to dominate the league. They most likely will make the playoffs. But, I mean, after a loss like this, you need to really step it up. And Bruce Arians kind of calling out Tom Brady after the game. It's not the best start, obviously. And I was actually talking to a couple people, too, about how the offensive line didn't play well. And you really see how that New England Patriots offense was built around Tom Brady getting the ball out quickly. When he couldn't do that and it's more of a realistic NFL team, look what happened. He's getting sacked. I'm telling you, man, he's going to age more this season than he has in probably the last 5 years if he keeps getting hit like this. Not going to be good. I'm telling you, Buccaneers are not a great team this year, not just yet.
It'll take some time. The one thing I do want to say is that Brady admittedly came out and said that he's been doing a lot more thinking as opposed to just reacting. Obviously, it's a new offense for him for the first time in over 15 years, and it's going to be an adjustment with no preseason games and only practice to go off of. So, yeah, Brady was thinking more than reacting, right? Brady's seen every defensive scheme in the world, but when he doesn't even know his own offense, I don't care who you are, how many championships you have, it's going to be somewhat of an adjustment. So I agree with you. I wasn't totally surprised that the Buccaneers kind of got off to a little bit of a shaky start. When we get to week 4, 5, and 6, if they haven't improved by then I think we can start to panic a little bit. All right, my second and final thought of week 1 before we jump into week 2. is the Philadelphia Eagles. And they came into this season with high expectations after winning the NFC East last year with, fourth and fifth string players. Carson Wentz was like the only healthy guy at the end of the year. And usually he's not even healthy. He's had back injuries and hasn't been able to complete a 16-game season in his career so far. But the Eagles came into the season kind of flying high. They did have a few injuries, but for the most part were pretty healthy. And they came into this game with a quick 10-0 lead in the first quarter. By the second quarter, they were up 17-0, and it was looking like it was going to be a blowout. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what it was. It's like the light bulb came on, like, oh, Washington, you guys have a football game to play. And the defense started to shine. The Washington football team's defense, even though it is only week one, I don't want to overreact, might have one of the best, if not the best, front lines in all of the NFL, partly because they have so many first-round draft picks on that line. Obviously, they took Chase Young with their first-round pick this year. They took Montez Sweat early on in the draft last year. They have, I believe, Payne from Alabama, who's a defensive tackle, and then another first round pick. So I mean, it is loaded with talent on their defensive line, and it showed as Carson Wentz was sacked 8 times in this game. 8 times, right? He just in the second half, it was like the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line was non-existent. So I think we have to give credit to this Washington football team for being resilient, just like their head coach Ron Rivera, who at halftime had to get treatment for his cancer treatment. So he wasn't even able to speak to his players. He was getting treatment, and it was Dwayne Haskins who actually stepped up and gave the halftime pep talk. So, I want to give credit to this Washington team, but for this Eagles team, it's like, man, not only did they blow a 17-point lead to a division rival in week one when they had all things rolling in the first half, and then they ended up losing a couple more players. Vinny Curry on defense, I believe. I'm not sure if it was Brandon Graham, another defender, but they had a few other injuries that are going to be significant. They get the Rams this week, so it's the Eagles' first home game. The Rams coming in after a good win against the Cowboys, but it doesn't get easier for this Eagles team. Coming into this season, many people pick them to win the NFC East again with a healthier squad, and they get off to a bad start again. So, unfortunately, both of my takeaways from week one were kind of negatives, but it was just very interesting how teams came in and we had these high expectations, and then they kind of just fell flat right off the bat. So still early on, don't want to, like I said, over-exaggerate, but interesting takeaways from week one.
Well, I would say that it wasn't both negatives. I mean, you talked about the the Washington football team really playing well, and the story behind Ron Rivera and Dwayne Haskins stepping up, that's a positive thing. That's an awesome thing to see. Hey, Jared, what did I say about the Eagles, too? I told you it might be a little weird this year and that we're going to be looking at Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz. Someone's got to go if it continues like this. It was perfect.
Okay with that.
Yeah, it was perfect. Interesting, too, with that Cardinals-Washington game next year or next week, Cardinals had the preparation with that San Francisco front line. So in some ways, they'll be used to seeing that. But that Washington front line absolutely is dangerous. Cardinals, I could see Kyler Murray getting sacked a couple times next week, just looking at that. All right, so we're going to move on to week 2, and we're just going to pick one game each or one team each. And I'm going to start with the Houston Texans Baltimore Ravens game. This is a Texans home game. We saw what Baltimore did. They ripped the Browns in half. The Texans played horrible against the Chiefs on Thursday Night Football in the first game of the season. It really wasn't competitive. I know the Chiefs are the Super Bowl champions, but it for the Texans, who have been a perennial playoff game team the last couple of years, it was not a good showing. And the non-Hopkins Texans do not look as explosive on offense. And David Johnson, I know he got the first touchdown, but I'm telling you, man, this Texans team is not as good as it has been the last couple of years. The Texans need to win that game against the Ravens. I'm going to say it right now. This is a huge game for the Texans. Not necessarily the Ravens, but I think the Texans need to really come out and play well, at least against those Ravens. If you're betting, maybe bet the spread a little differently. I think the spread is Ravens by 7. I could see it being a very close game, maybe a last possession game there in Houston. I think they'll come out. They'll try to step it up. You got the Chiefs and Ravens, a killer start to the season, right, as far as AFC teams. But I really want to see the Texans come out and play the Ravens well. I do not want to see the Ravens blow out the Texans like they did for the Browns. The Texans might not make the playoffs if they come out and they get blown out again. I'm telling you that because the Jaguars won, the Titans won. The Colts didn't look as good. I may have overreacted to the Colts a little bit. Philip Rivers didn't play good in his debut, and they choked as well. But the Texans, man, I'm telling you, they're in trouble for the playoffs if they take another bad loss to the Ravens. It's just not good for their psyche at all.
Yeah, no, they're in trouble week 2. The Ravens are going to blow them out. This is not going to be a game. I'm sorry.
Ooh.
You're a little
we'll
more
see what happens.
optimistic
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
with the spread, and you think there is no way. The way the Ravens looked in week 1 and how pathetic the Texans looked in week 1, with Deshaun Watson just getting that huge contract. I'm sorry, it's Deshaun Watson versus everyone else. Now, that's not to throw shade at Will Fuller or Randall Cobb or Brandon Cooks, but I'm sorry, neither of those 3 receivers can replace the production that DeAndre Hopkins had. And other than Laremy Tunsil, who's their left tackle for Deshaun Watson, that offensive line is not that good. So, yeah, it's going to be a long season for the Houston Texans, and I don't really see this being that big of an issue for the Ravens. I think they're going to go into Houston, and I think they're going to smack them. So moving on to my kind of preview for week 2, and it's really talking about, in my opinion, the biggest matchup of week 2, which is the New England Patriots traveling to play Seattle for Seattle's first home game on Sunday Night Football, right? Both of these teams coming off of big wins in week 1. The Seahawks, like you mentioned earlier, Nick, kind of rolled over the Falcons, and I picked the Seahawks to make the playoffs this year. I told you, Russell, last name Wilson, can carry a team regardless of who he is playing with. He makes guys look better, even though he doesn't have the greatest offensive line. He doesn't have the best receiving core. The dude is just special. He makes plays when there are no plays to be made. And even let's look at the Patriots right now, right? No Tom Brady. Cam Newton coming in. What's the offense going to look like? Is it going to be the same? Is Cam Newton going to throw 30 or 40 times like Bill Belichick had Tom Brady do? Absolutely not. Cam Newton, 19 passing attempts. Now, he completed 15 of those, so that is a very good percentage. Only 155 yards, no touchdowns, but also no interceptions, did not turn the ball over. Listen, Bill Belichick, this is like candy for him. Cam Newton rushed for 15 carries, 75 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I think we're going to see a lot more of Cam Newton using his legs and his physicality to kind of get this Patriots offense going. I'm really intrigued in this week 2 matchup to see this Patriots offense go up against this Seattle defense that look really good. And we can't forget Jamal Lewis coming over to the Seahawks from the Jets. He obviously made a big impact for the Seahawks against the Falcons in week 1. So that's going to be a good matchup. That chess game of Cam Newton on offense versus Jamal Adams, the quarterback of the defense. In my opinion, the best matchup of week 2.
Oh, no, absolutely, Jared. That is a huge game. Exciting one to watch for sure. Yeah, just getting on the Cam Newton stuff, because you look at when he's healthy, he looked like the MVP again, right? Like, I know they only scored 21 points or whatever, but like 75 yards, 15 rush attempts, 2 touchdowns. He ran somebody over at the goal line, too. Cam Newton is back. Healthy Cam is still a great top 15 quarterback in this league. And if you're the Panthers, for example, they lost to the Raiders. They have Teddy Bridgewater, but man, do you kind of maybe wish that you stuck around with Cam Newton a little bit, right? Maybe they should have had a quarterback competition there and tried to figure it out, because I think this Patriots team is probably going to make the playoffs now with Cam Newton. If they keep up with this rush game, look, the Cardinals won because of Kyler Murray rushing for almost 100 yards too. If he doesn't do that, they probably don't win. So it's a quarterback being able to run, being smart, sliding, all that stuff. Cam Newton using his physicality in the smartest ways possible. That's when you use your physicality too, when you're going for a touchdown. You don't use it maybe on second down or something to run over a corner. And that's where I look at Kyler Murray and other quarterbacks like Russell Wilson, who slide. They may lose a yard or 2 here and there on a run, but they're safe and they're not hurt. Newton, as long as he plays it smart, they absolutely will make the playoff. I mean, those Bills Patriots games I'm already looking forward to are going to be great. But yeah, if you're the Panthers, man, you might have just lost out on a quarterback for the next 5 years again. And Bridgewater may work. I don't know. But, they got the Buccaneers this week, too, and they can go down 0-2 real quick this season.
Yeah, no, last thing really quickly for the Patriots, you mentioned them only scoring 21 points against the Dolphins. Now, yes, there are going to be games where they need to score more than 21, but on average, in my opinion, if the Patriots can hover around 24 points a game with the defense that they had 3 interceptions in this past game, right? Or this past game against the Dolphins. And when you've got Stephon Gilmore, the best cover corner in all of the NFL, and Bill Belichick as the mastermind still behind that defense, he puts players in positions to make plays. So, yeah, with that defense and the style of offense that these Patriots are running right now, it's going to be a race, a 1-2 punch with the Patriots and the Bills to see who can win that AFC East.
Yeah, with the Patriots, their offense too, it's so it reminds me of that Panthers team that went to the Super Bowl. How many people get touches? Sony Michel 10 carries, Rex Burkhead 7 carries, James White 5 carries. He also was involved in the pass game. He got Edelman and Harry involved in the offense. Both had 5 receptions. So, and then the couple touchdowns that they score are rushes, and Cam Newton took over. That's what needs to happen. So, but that Seahawks Patriots game, go Patriots, because I'm in the NFC West, and I obviously any AFC team beating an NFC team is good for me and you, Jared, as well. But, that's going to be a very, very interesting game. I really like that Patriots Cam Newton. Like it feels different. It's not the Tom Brady kind of braggadocious. It's more of like Cam Newton returning, and it's fun to see him play. And don't take his chain after either.
Yeah, no, you don't listen. Cam Newton already has enough fuel and fire for this season alone after getting released by the Panthers. You don't need to, kind of antagonize him anymore. He's got enough fuel on his own to go out and beat you.
Absolutely. Well, Jared, so we have actually about 5 minutes left. I wanted to pose one question to you to return to the Clippers talk really quickly, because I thought we might not have enough time.
Wow, you want to go back to the Clippers?
Jared, I'm a sports guy, right? I can respect it. My team lost, but I have an important question for you. With the fact that they probably will lose a guy like Montrezl Harrell in the offseason, think the Clippers need another name? Do you think they maybe need, I don't know, Giannis or somebody to get over the hump?
Stop it. Giannis is not coming to the Clippers. I'm sorry.
No, but do you think they need another piece possibly, or do you think Lou and Kawhi and Paul George is enough for this team?
I think they do need another piece. I think they need to get a little bigger. Now, obviously, their style of play worked for most of the year. But, when you're going up against the likes of the Lakers, who have Anthony Davis, 7 foot, and then they can bring in Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee, who are both 7 foot as well, rebounding will be a problem, right? And so I do think that they need to bring in a bigger a bigger piece, or more of a center, an actual center type, because other than Zubac, they didn't necessarily have that true center on their team this year.
Yeah.
But here's the problem, right? They traded away all those picks to get Paul George, and because they made it to the playoffs this year, they're not going to be in the lottery. And so unless they go out in free agency and find someone, they're not going to really get someone to develop in the draft. And listen, the Clippers team is going to be good next year. Are they going to make the playoffs next year as long as everyone stays healthy? Yes. But I'm sorry, there is a chip on their shoulder that is bigger than almost anything I can think of when they can, as a team, they cannot get past the second round. So whatever they need to do, they need to go out and do it, because if anything, this is Doc Rivers' last year, unless they get to the NBA Finals. Who knows what will happen with the tandem duo of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Now, this Clippers team gave up a lot of resources to get both of those players, but that doesn't mean that if this doesn't work out, that Paul George decides to leave or something like that. I mean, I'm sorry, to get bounced out in the second round, and when you have 3 opportunities to close out a series with those 2 superstars and the rest of the nucleus that they have, I will say it once again. It is embarrassing. It is pathetic. And I am here for it all day long.
Yeah, I'm still sad, but it made me a little happy again to talk about the Cardinals. And the one thing I was telling people, too, is getting back to the NFL, is like, okay, well, the Clippers lost, and most of my friends are Lakers fans, so I'll take that on the chin. I still have the Cardinals. The Cardinals still play the Cowboys, so I still got that if they can beat them. And the Cardinals still play the Carolina Panthers. My boy RKJ, man, too. been talking a lot of trash this morning for the podcast. I'm recording a podcast later with them as well. He told me he's going to roast the hell out of me on that podcast.
Yeah, you're not done. You're not off the hook today. You got me, and I felt like I almost even took it a little too easy on you. So I'm going to actually send a text to Ryan and let him know that he's got to step his game up a little more. You know, at a certain point, I felt a little bad for you because I put myself in your shoes. Like if it was the Lakers, I know you'd be roasting me too. So I gave you a little bit of a break, but I know that Ryan will not.
He absolutely will not. But yeah, so that made me feel a little bit better. You know, hey, Dodgers still got the playoffs, right? The Cardinals, they beat the 49ers. Like, hey, we still got the Cowboys, all these games. Really, really interesting. Real quick note about the Cardinals, too, with the NFC West. Their next 4 games, let me just pull this up really quickly and show you who their next 5 games are. So they get the big win against the 49ers, right? Their next 4 games until the Cowboys, Washington, Detroit, Carolina, and the Jets. So, you're looking at the Cardinals. Cardinals could potentially be 4-1, 5-0 coming into that Cowboys game. That's why I said that win for the Cardinals against the San Francisco 49ers, unbiasedly, it shows that there might be another competition for that NFC West title. The Cardinals could be 5-0 going into that Monday night game against the Cowboys. So, very, very interesting there, the way the schedule works out for the Cardinals after that big win for the 49ers. Very, very interesting. But, that's it for this podcast, Jared. We stayed pretty good on time, too. We're about around an hour, too, with all those topics. Next week we'll likely be talking about more NFL, probably a similar format, and maybe a little college football, too, with the SEC starting and all that. And then, of course, you do have Nuggets and Lakers, and you do have Heat, Celtics. Big first game there. Bam Adebayo with the big block at the rim to stop the Celtics from a win. So that should be a very interesting series. I could see that going 6 or 7 as well. But for this podcast, we are over. I am the sad Clippers fan, Nick Nenad.
And I'm Jared Smith. Clippers going to clip. That's all I got to say. Clippers going to clip.
See you guys next week.